The aircraft carrier approaching the Korean Peninsula. Mr. Walsh, likely during the weekend, the USS Vinson likely to arrive, Carl Vinson. What would that mean for the overall situation? The stick is there?
Well, I guess, but I must say I don't expect that to mean very much. I mean, by way of context, South Korea and the United States yearly hold massive, and I mean massive, military exercises right off the coast of North Korea. That would seem to be much more threatening than simply sending over a carrier group with a couple of ships and some airplanes. So I guess it's an attempt to deter North Korea from conducting a nuclear test this Saturday, but I don't think there's much chance that they'll actually attack North Korea, and frankly I think it's symbolic, and it's a rather small symbol compared to other sorts of things the U.S. has done in the past.
However, the DPRK, Mr. Teng, has reacted already, both in its media and also from the official side, suggesting any preemptive strikes U.S. likely to make, DPRK is going to react in a very strong way, including having the nuclear option.
Yeah, this is another side of the game played by DPRK and by the United States propaganda. Always, the DPRK leaders would like to show their tough position toward any, movement in the area toward the United States or ROK. So this is actually a routine attitude toward DPRK, toward the United States, and also toward ROK. So we should be very careful about the measures taken by Donald Trump's administration. I think he has very specific policy toward DPRK, as we have seen in recent days. That is direct, and also he would like to use force against DPRK.
At least as a threat.
Yeah.
Talking about the new policy, so-called, whether they have a policy now in Washington toward DPRK comprehensively, we don't know. But Mr. Teng, would a stick work on its own?
Yeah, I think this is actually a movement for Donald Trump to establish a new policy toward DPRK, as compared with President Obama, the former president of the United States.
Strategic patience, as
he
was
used
being illustrated.
to adopt a so-called balanced strategic patience toward DPRK. He had done nothing, to the DPRK at least in 3 or 4 years. And Donald Trump this time, as we have witnessed in recent days, we can find that he's very tough. Of course, he's a businessman. He would like to make a big noise, and sometimes just to watch carefully on any changes in the DPRK.
Interestingly, you used the word make a big noise. Is that the real true essence of the latest development, Mr. Walsh? Because as long as the aircraft carrier is there and the whole strike group, there are more chances of having a conflict than there were not, obviously. On the other hand, you see President Trump determined to, quote unquote, take action, but at the same time do not provide option to the DPRK in terms of diplomacy. Will that one-sided pressure work?
I doubt it. Now, I think you're right to say it's sort of like theater. And let me, I don't think Mr. Trump is intending to use military action, to respectfully disagree with your guest, is intending to use military action against North Korea. Last week, in fact, the Trump administration concluded its policy review on North Korea. So they now have a policy. It's called extreme punishment and negotiation, with the emphasis more on extreme punishment than negotiation. But at least negotiation made it into the phrase. But they think it as something that would come at the end. But they are not looking, in my view, to attack North Korea. I think they reviewed all the policy options, including a military option, and concluded that that was just not feasible. It wasn't doable. So I think this is more about pressure and symbolism, and the real heart of the policy is not going to be moving an aircraft carrier around. Unfortunately, it's going to be a return to sanctions, sanctions against the North, and sanctions possibly against China. So in some ways, things really haven't changed very much, but what we have is a little more theater. But I agree with you, it's dangerous theater, because someone could miscalculate. Kim Jong-un sitting in Pyongyang may actually believe that Donald Trump is prepared to use force. And if that's the case, if he has misperceived that, then the danger of inadvertent escalation or a mistake does increase without doubt.
Okay. Mr. Teng, China has been advocating over the years, particularly recently, so-called double suspension solution and double track solution, meaning that U.S. has to suspend some of so-called provocative actions and also movement toward the DPRK, while DPRK has also suspended its nuclear tests. Double track meaning given the DPRK diplomacy options, but at the same time make sure the nuclear options has to be taken off from the list of the DPRK. So at this point, what does China think about the latest development?
After the suspension of the six parties talk in 2009, actually all the countries concerned in this region, I think, have done nothing to the DPRK nuclear issue. This is a so-called strategic position. It's a pity, during the past 3 or 4 years, the Teng Jianqun, has done two nuclear tests and at least more than 40, missile launches in the past years. So this is really a direct threat from DPRK, especially its nuclear bomb and also its missile capability.
So what is China's attitude then?
I think China's attitude is clear-cut there. For example, we have 3 principles. First, the denuclearization, and the second is the peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula, and the last one is the negotiation. The only, at best, choice for all the countries to establish to solve this issue.
But Mr. Teng, if I could go to you first before I go to our American panelists, that is, it seems that Mr. Trump apparently was trying to take action after his summit with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Was he trying to send any kind of message related to the summit? Or actually China and the United States worked out certain kinds of consensus many would be suspicious?
Yeah, I think DPRK nuclear is not a technical, just because of nuclear capability or nuclear technology. It's a competition among major powers in this region. Actually, it's a competition between China and the United States in Northeast Asia.
But China was saying it is rather an issue directly between the United States and the DPRK themselves.
Yeah, because the two actually are players in this game. They always, bargaining for their interest, for their own sake. For example, the United States would like to say, you should, give up all your nuclear capabilities and missile capabilities, and the DPRK would like to say, we need a diplomatic relationship with the United States. So I think each side, DPRK and the United States, they all have their own, interest in this game.
Is this situation unique in any way? We can look at history. Usually it could help us to understand better about the latest situation. For years, the international community has tried to negotiate an end to the DPRK's nuclear and missile development. In the year 1994, for example, Pyongyang consented under the agreed framework to freeze its illicit plutonium weapons program in exchange for U.S. aid. It later collapsed as the U.S. failed to deliver on its commitment. And then there were the six-party talks, remember? It was years ago, which led to Pyongyang agreeing to abandon the pursuit of nuclear weapons, but they were later stalled over the verification issues. And then the DPRK declared in the year 2009 that it would pull out of the so-called six-party talks then, and it would resume its nuclear enrichment program as a deterrent, and situation has continued until where we are today. Having known part of the history, Mr. Walsh, help us to understand what are the main players in the situation and who should make the utmost effort in order to solve the entangled problems now. Mr. Walsh, do you think the Trump administration is ready in any way to use also diplomacy as a tool?
Well, lots of questions there. On diplomacy, I think they are. As I said, the name of their new policy is extreme punishment and engagement. And the engagement part is diplomacy. But I don't think they're leading with that. I think they're leading with the pressure part, but they're open to diplomacy, which is a good thing because they could have a policy that was just simply pressure. Now, as to the main players here, and this is an important point, really, that you're bringing up, there are four main players. It's North Korea, South Korea, the U.S., and China. And one of the things that troubles me about the current policy by Mr. Trump is he's sending his carrier group and making all these noises, and we don't even have a president in South Korea. We're not going to have a president in South Korea until early May. And it seems to me he should wait. I mean, if it's going to be four players that are directly involved, we should wait for the fourth player, which is South Korea. And finally, let me say a little bit of history here. I'm a fan of the agreed framework. I thought it worked. Many people in the U.S. look negatively upon it. I look positively. But it wasn't only the U.S. that led to the collapse of that agreement. North Korea had been beginning to violate that agreement by trying to import centrifuges for an enrichment program.
Right.
So there's fault on both sides there, although I agree that it was really the Bush administration, George W. Bush, that pushed it to its ultimate conclusion and failure.
Of course, it was also the Bush administration which started with the other parties about the six-party talks. And now it's about, gentlemen, whether there's going to be a framework with all the players involved or with some of the players involved in order to talk to one another, at least to look for a solution. An aircraft carrier, Mr. Teng, can be sent by a country very easily to the region of conflict or possible conflict, and that would only escalate the tension. The most difficult and most wisdom consuming is whether we can find consensus. Mr. Teng, where do you think the consensus is?
Yeah, so far we haven't got any consensus in terms of the DPRK nuclear issue.
But can there be consensus? Where could the hope be?
I think since we are facing the direct and the real threat from DPRK, we should have consensus to deal with the challenges. For example, actually in recent 20 or 30 years, the United States has been manipulating the DPRK nucleus. So there were several occasions in Korean Peninsula for the peaceful and the stable solution to the dispute between the two Koreans. But for example, in 2000, the two presidents of the two Koreans just met in Pyongyang and they signed several agreements. And I think the big challenge today is the deployment of the U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula. And for example, if there were no such so-called threat from DPRK, could the United States have any excuse to deploy so many troops, so many advanced equipment there? The answer might be no.
All right, I think it's very clear, Mr. Walsh, the mutual suspicion that existing among all the parties within the six-party talks about the nuclear issue is the ultimate root of all the problems that we're having today. But the question is, now, you see, Mr. Walsh, in South Korea, their foreign minister even talk about, let's not exaggerate some of the assessment. Let's look at the reality. So with the spirit of looking at the reality, do you think there can be consensus? Where is the hope?
Well, I think there are some, we don't have consensus, but we do have some overlapping interests and some agreement. Both China and the U.S. and South Korea, rather, support a concept of denuclearization. Everyone, all three parties agree on that. And North Korea said that it might denuclearize if the U.S. dropped its hostile policy. I think there's a possibility for engagement. At least the Trump administration included that in its new policy. Certainly China wants engagement. The new president of South Korea, if you look at the polls, may be more pro-engagement. There may be some consensus there. There might be some consensus on China, who does feel threatened by this. Listen, North Korea is not your average country. It causes all sorts of problems and it does horrible things, and it causes problems for China. I think there might be consensus that China could do more to crack down on the private Chinese businesses that are helping North Korea do procurement for its WMD program. Not fruits and vegetables, but technologies that support the WMD program. So I think there's some areas where we could agree, but I also agree with the notion that there's no reason to rush this. We shouldn't replace strategic patience with strategic haste. There's no sort of immediate problem that requires we escalate. So I'd like to take everyone to take a step back, let the South Koreans have their presidential election, and then everyone get on the same page.
We're going to go into some of the South Korean panelists later in our program to hear what they have to say about the latest situation. Mr. Teng, I want to give you a long question because I have to set the stage for you before you answer that question. That is China's action right after the Xi and Trump summit. China sent Mr. Wu Dawei, a veteran on the DPRK issue, to South Korea now. And also, China returned some of the coal trucks back to North Korea before the talks with the United States and later as well. Coal is a big exporter of North Korea to China. Meanwhile, China has been rumored by the others, so-called sending troops on the borders, which the Chinese Foreign Ministry suggested. There has no news about that, according to them. So, different sides of information involving China. Where is China now? Can China play any further role in the process?
I'm sure China should play a further role in this game because any war or clash in Korean Peninsula will give some disastrous result to the development, to domestic stability in China. And if you look at history, especially in 100 years history, there were 4 large-scale wars, and all gave a very serious impact on the social life and also on the development of China. So we should learn lessons from the history. And now China used to be, we are mediator, not a player in this game. But I think while we are facing the threat is direct, is real, we should change our mind and we should pursue the United States to think about the cooperation, not to only manipulate the situation, therefore, for individual countries' sake. This is actually a real challenge for China because China and the United States do not have efficient trust at this moment. For example, if we cut all these connection with the DPRK, including the trade, I'm sure that might give some effect on the situation in DPRK. But if there are some refugees, maybe 1 million refugees rushed into China, that might be disaster for the local people. And also the nuclear test will affect the the social life of our citizens in northeast China.